I'm really delighted to be here. I am really thankful to the Amplifying Voices webinar series for giving me the opportunity to talk about my research. So this was a part of my doctoral research. Like Karen mentioned that I've just submitted my thesis. It's been 2 months. So I'm going to talk about the dynamics and distribution of nitrous oxide in the Indian Sundarbans estuaries. So without further ado, I'd like to focus on the importance of studying nitrous oxide. You see, given in the adjacent graph that although nitrous oxide is in parts per billion compared to what we know about carbon dioxide, which is in parts per million, this gas has been on a steady rise at the rate of 2% per decade. Although the concentration of nitrous oxide in the atmosphere is quite low, as we can see here, but it has a long lifetime, a residence time of about 114 years. This is a previous number. The recent numbers have been adjusted to 109 years. And it has a global warming potential of about 265 times than carbon dioxide. Yet the mitigation on nitrous oxide in view of climate research studies has not received that much of importance as carbon dioxide has, although it is also on the rise. So you can say that it's quite an underrated gas compared to carbon dioxide. In recent 36 years, it has increased by 30% thanks to rise in population and demand for food. So there's a lot of agriculture going on. And also in the medical environment, there is the nitrous oxide comes out as a residue of anesthetics. So that's quite a cause of concern, as we can see from the graph here. Also, not to forget that nitrous oxide is something which it's very dangerous as it depletes the ozone layer. To put into perspective carbon dioxide and methane for nitrous oxide, we can see that the gases are not, this nitrous oxide is not that far off. It's also catching up quickly and gradually. So, and the major reason for nitrous oxide emission is due to use of nitrogenous fertilizers and animal husbandry. So this is sourced from IPCC assessment report, the 5th assessment report. Given the Global Carbon Project, which also budgeted the nitrous oxide for the decade of 2007 to 2016, we see that if the anthropogenic sources are added to the natural sources, then the source of nitrous oxide from the earth to the atmosphere is more than what sinks to the air, from the air to the ground. So this is quite a cause of concern. So how is nitrous oxide produced? So it's based on the oxygen availability. So there are two pathways. One, if it's oxic, then it's via nitrification. If it's anoxic, then it's via denitrification. Nitrous oxide is a byproduct of both these processes. It involves a lot of genes. So, hello? Yes, so it involves a lot of genes, but we are not going to concentrate on the genes part. We will mostly concentrate on the distribution and dynamics of nitrous oxide. As this has been put in vividly by Lisa Katal, all the genes that are used to quantify the above processes. So we'll focus more on the nitrous oxide, the chemistry part of this gas. So this review has been beautifully summarized by Murray et al. 2015 in estuarine environments, salt marshes, mangroves, intertidal sediments, seagrass. And the global flux estimate suggests that yes, these environments are significant sources of nitrous oxide. But most of these estuaries are human impacted estuaries. The pattern of observation that there is the dissolved inorganic nitrogen concentration and the availability of oxygen are the two main factors which control the rate of bacterial production of nitrous oxide. Even in the Indian estuaries that have been studied so far, these are human impacted estuaries, which can be seen on the concentration of nitrous oxide that is coming from the agricultural runoff, the fertilizers which are adding to the waters. So we see that the systems are all supersaturated in nitrous oxide with considerable flux densities and a wide range of nitrous oxide concentration. In this scenario, we chose to study the Indian Sundarbans estuaries. First, because it is a UNESCO heritage site on biodiversity. It has been labeled so since 1987. But recently, due to the changing climate scenarios, it's subject to a lot of tropical thunderstorms, cyclones. I hope everybody have heard about Hudhud and then Umpun in 2020, which occurred. It wreaked quite a havoc in these areas, and the islands were under a lot of pressure due to loss of land cover and the tree cover. So we also wanted to see whether the pressure of the island is reflected onto the waters, the water condition of the estuaries. I'd like to focus on this fact that Indian estuaries need to be focused and studied more regards to greenhouse gases, because as per Tian et al. 2020, the paper which came out in Nature, that due to rising population in India, China, and Brazil, so there is a rise in demand for food, and accordingly, there is the increased use of nitrogenous fertilizers for increased amount of agriculture, which ultimately is supposed to run off into the water bodies, causing the favorable conditions for nitrous oxide emission to accentuate. So to put forth the research questions that we formulated, we wanted to find out the distribution of nitrous oxide concentrations along the stretch of the Indian Sundarbans, and whether nitrous oxide was produced in situ or whether it was coming from external sources like runoff or discharge or poor water discharge and sorts. We also wanted to know the environmental influence, like the influence of salinity, water temperature, pH on the dissolved nitrous oxide in the system. Finally, we wanted to estimate whether the estuarine waters of the Indian Sundarbans estuaries were actually a net source of nitrous oxide. To do the research, we tried to cover as much area possible. So we started from the head and reached as much as possible to the mouth of the estuary, which opens into Bay of Bengal. The three prominent estuaries that we chose were Saptamukhi, Thakuran, and the Matla. Compared to Saptamukhi and Thakuran, the Matla estuary runs along a longer course and widens into Bay of Bengal. In contrast, the Saptamukhi estuary is more land-bound, which means it receives human impact more compared to the other two estuaries. So it receives inputs from agriculture, its close proximity to agricultural lands. Thakuran estuary, on the other hand, is more of a reserved forest bound area. So it's mostly the people who live in the forest camps are the ones who inhabit these places. Finally, in the Matla, the human intervention is the least. Hence, we studied the distribution. Alongside that, we also studied full seasonal cover of pre-monsoon, monsoon, and post-monsoon with tidal observations in 3 representative sites. For the assessment of nitrous oxide production, we performed incubation experiments on the same chosen sites, 3 representative sites of each estuary. We also sampled pore water. So this is a figure of a typical section of the exposed intertidal zone at low tide area, at the low tide condition of the Indian Sundarbans. This system is currently receiving very limited freshwater supply. Other than rainfall, there is no perennial source of fresh water here. Also, recently, it's been subject to a lot of tropical cyclones. Other than that, recent study in this area has denoted that this estuary is quite marine dominated, where the source of fresh water is only, like I said, it's monsoonal rainfall, and the salinity varies from 12 to 33. The system can be considered as polyhaline. A lot of turbulence and it's all dependent on the tide. So I'd like to point out that one of very well-known Indian authors had coined the term tide country for the Indian Sundarbans in his novel, The Hungry Tide. So in this situation, the turbulence causes a lot of resuspension of sediments, which can seep into the adjacent waters when the intertidal zones become exposed at low tide. So this makes this area highly productive and conducive to the bacterial production of nitrous oxide. So we sampled water from the 0.5 meters from the water surface, and we also sampled gas from the intertidal zones using the static chamber method. So these are the two photographs of me sampling. Here, the collection was done also for incubation samples and pore water samples. One limitation of the sediment to air emission study was that we could not do the study in the high tide conditions because these areas become absolutely inaccessible. So already at low tide condition, it's very difficult to stand here because the ground is very clayey and soft. So this part was a limitation of our research. All the gas samples were analyzed in gas chromatograph, and the flux calculations were done using a micro at the water air interface and the sediment air interface using micrometeorological method. So coming to the results, we see that yes, due to the slight difference in the geographical setting of the three estuaries, Saptamukhi estuary, being closer to land and human impact, showed more concentrations of nitrous oxide compared to what Thakuran and Matla did. But Matla showed a prominent seasonal pattern where in the monsoon, the concentrations was maximum. But this pattern was not followed for the other two estuaries. In contrast, for the pore water nitrous oxide, which was analyzed, we found that there was a steady pattern of less concentrations in the pre-monsoon, which rose in the monsoon. So this suggests that pore water nitrous oxide may have an effect on the monsoonal dissolved hike in nitrous oxide concentrations. And yes, according to the established literature, we also found out that there is a significant influence of dissolved inorganic nitrogen on the saturations of nitrous oxide. Particularly, this rises in the monsoon and drops in the post-monsoon. So there's a clear linear relationship between dissolved inorganic nitrogen and nitrous oxide saturation for this system. This system is also quite well oxygenated. As you can see, there were points where saturation was abnormally high and also the points where it was low, but the average of 201 micromolar concentration of oxygen suggests, and in previous studies, which it corroborates, that the system is a well oxygenated estuary. Yet, the production of nitrous oxide was seen from the ratio, which was about 0.5. It's positive. All the excess nitrous oxide to the apparent oxygen utilization on an average was found to be positive on an average. But this is less than what Bargos et al. Had noticed for the estuarine environment that they worked on. It was 0.75, but this suggests that nitrous oxide production happens in these estuaries. To further justify this suggestion, we also found out that the nitrous oxide concentrations in the incubation experiments rose from the 0 time mark to 48-hour mark. Particularly, it was within this hour that the rise was noticed. Beyond 48 hours, as we can see that the concentration kind of fluctuates here, but for all three estuaries. But in case of in Matla, in the monsoon season, the rise is steady and quite prominent. When translated to, so these are the slopes of these graphs found out the specific production rate of nitrous oxide. Calculating the actual nitrous oxide production rate for the seasons, we find that in the Matla, the seasonality is the most prominent. like it was the most prominent for the dissolved or nitrous oxide concentration. Other two estuaries show comparable production rates, but again, the monsoon production rate was higher. So it can be said that rainfall does have an influence on bringing in nitrogenous materials via runoff, which is contributing to the bacterial production of nitrous oxide. But this requires further study, the exact process to be pinpointed. Not only did the in situ production became prominent was observed, we also found that the lateral transport increases in the monsoon. So possible denitrification in the sediment had caused in the monsoon for the pore water nitrous oxide to rise. So this translated into the lateral transport. So we see that it's in situ production of nitrous oxide is also possible, and it is also possible that nitrous oxide comes from the intertidal sediment via pore water seeping into the adjacent water. So it's the product of both pelagic metabolism and lateral transport. We also did a bit of tidal variation study, but there was no such pattern which we found for nitrous oxide with salinity, particularly. For these are tidal patterns from three respective sites of the three estuaries that we studied. But we need further study on this to know that what exactly causes the patterns to become this erratic and, haphazard. So since there is no proper influence of salinity of the waters on the nitrous oxide, that means that again the two processes of pelagic metabolism and lateral transport combined has an influence actually on the nitrous oxide saturation in the system. On performing regression equation, I found that the parameters like salinity, oxygen being negatively correlated to nitrous oxide, did not quite show a very strong regression, testing that it's not just these particular parameters which are at play here, but external factors are also influencing the nitrous oxide concentration and saturation. The fluxes from air water at the air water interface rather showed a decreasing pattern corresponding to the wind speed that was maximum in the pre-monsoon, which gradually decreased in the post-monsoon. It did not follow the pattern of monsoonal maxima, which we noticed for the dissolved nitrous oxide concentration. So it can be said that wind speed did play a part other than, and also salinity and nitrate, which we find that is about 45% of variability can be explained by this regression equation. Again, for the diurnal variation, the tidal variation of fluxes of nitrous oxide, we did not see any proper pattern that we can disseminate from the graph that we can see here. So this is the average tidal height that was averaged from 3 tidal cycles. And these are the 3 tidal observations of nitrous oxide fluxes in July, June, and August. But we definitely see no such pattern. So this means that this system being so dynamic, it's very hard to disseminate the exact pattern of nitrous oxide in the estuary. So we estimated a budget where we found out that yes, nitrous oxide can be suggested to be a net source. The Indian Sundarbans estuaries can be suggested to be a net source of nitrous oxide from the water to the atmosphere. To sum up the whole thing, that we find that nitrous oxide is distributed in a highly variable manner among the estuaries, with only Matla estuary showing the seasonality. It's intimately linked to the dissolved inorganic nitrogen concentration. nitrous oxide is actually a product of both pelagic metabolism and lateral transport. So further studies on the nitrification and denitrification processes in water and the sediment can help us to understand which process actually dominates the nitrous oxide concentration in the estuaries. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. I'd like to acknowledge my mentor, Dr. Sandeep Kumar Mukhopadhyay, for mentoring me for the PhD program. Dr. Pratap Bhattacharya, who's from National Rice Research Institute in Cuttack in India. He helped me with the gas measurements. Professor Bange, he provided a lot of valuable comments which helped shape this. This is also coming in the shape of a manuscript very soon. This is the funding agency. I'm really glad that they supported me financially for 5 years. The Sundarban Biosphere Reserve gave me a 5-year-long field permission. So, and also my co-authors, and finally, again, ASLO Executive Committee for the opportunity. Thank you so much. And this is the publication, with a large part of it was covered. So please read up if you're interested. Thanks.
Thank you. That was very, very, very nice to see, and also very good in time. Awesome. And I'm pretty sure that there are some questions. Who wants to start?
So I stopped sharing.
Maybe you wait a moment. Maybe there's someone who has a question about a specific slide or something.
Yeah, no problem.
Let's see. Hans-Peter, please go ahead.
I have a question concerning the importance of estuaries for nitrite oxide fluxes. So what's your impression? How important are they? And how will it change with global change?
So since estuaries are the meeting point of land and the ocean, so and the more materials come in from the land, so that will have, and if the local climate, if that is altered, so eventually, and the estuarine water also drains into the coastal waters. So if there is more of nitrous oxide load or carbon dioxide, methane load, the other two gases that we always discuss in unison with nitrous oxide, then this could pose a problem on the global budget.
I was also thinking more about these extreme events. So you will have more floodings, but on the other hand, you will also have more droughts. So how will that affect the budget?
Droughts, if I'm to talk about the study area, my study area, then the droughts are actually not the problem. The main problem is the flooding and loss of land, and land breaking into water due to erosion. So because the mangroves are also getting washed away. So, and with the mangroves getting washed away, the trapped nitrous oxide in the intertidal sediments, they're coming into the waters. So that is a problem. So that way we need to conserve the estuarine environments as much as possible and mitigate nitrous oxide emission there, so that it doesn't escalate eventually.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And I think Roxanne had another question.
Yes, hi. I don't know if you can see me. I'm on my phone. It's so unpleasant. I'm so sorry. My computer is blocked today. Thank you very much for a really interesting presentation. I'm a big fan of nitrous oxide. I guess one thing I really appreciated was your attention played to lateral transport, particularly during the monsoon period, and that relative importance of what might be trapped, in sediments or the soils that are being expulsed during that moment. So the monsoon seems to be a hot moment of these emissions, correct? And what I'd like to understand with that is, because I'm not from your area of the world, is what is the duration of that, and is that changing, or is it? Can you comment on that and how that might influence the cycle?
The monsoon, you mean?
Yes, yes. It's just because
the monsoon has actually extended, so it's a bit of a problem. It has become previously November, December used to be proper post-monsoon when winter would set in. But now even in November, late October, we got a lot of rainfall, proper rainfall. So this kind of has also led to the lateral transport being more the washing of the agricultural lands via the monsoonal fresh water. That is again going to bring in more materials eventually. So the more the monsoon, the more vulnerable the system becomes, because with salinity being the system being marine dominated, if there is the system is kind of accustomed to the marine environment. But now again, if there is a lot of freshwater input all of a sudden and a prolonged freshwater fraction staying in, so that could cause a problem with the biota as well.
Yeah,
that
so
are kind of consume nitrous oxide. And yeah.
So the projection would be that the emission possibility will increase as a function of these changes.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, maybe I can quickly follow up on that, maybe, because if I understood it correctly, then in the Madla estuary, you had the highest production rates. Is that correct? Although this was the one that was least intensely settled or used by humans. So do you know why this is?
This could be the reason, could be the system which comes maybe the runoff coming from the head of the estuary due to extensive rainfall. And since the area is quite broad, so it kind of distributes, and the bacteria which are probably adjacent to the creek water, which are doing the bacterial nitrous oxide production, probably they seep into the main riverine area, the main stretch. So finally showing a maximum production. And also the more materials of dissolved inorganic nitrogen which are coming in, so that is also rising in the Madla during monsoon, because the rainfall is ultimately bringing in, and there is a huge area along which the nitrous or dissolved inorganic nitrogen is spreading. So eventually the collective way of that is kind of reflected on the total nitrous oxide production in the system.
All right, thank you. Are there more questions? Doesn't seem to be the case.
Has a question.
Tony, yeah.
Then I would like to thank.
Can you get me?
Yeah.
Yep.
I can.
Oh,
I can.
Oh, there is. I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Avanti, for the excellent presentation. And I just want to find out whether there's a specific pathway by which nitrous oxide gets transported into the atmosphere. For instance, we have, we know that with other greenhouse gases like CO2, there's a temperature-mediated flux between the water and the atmosphere. So does this exist with nitrous oxide? And the second part of my question is, has there been any calculations of the actual flux between the water and the atmosphere, and maybe the reverse as well? Thank you.
Okay. The first question, thank you for the question. For the first part of the question that you asked, temperature sensitivity, it can be a point, but since if I should go back to the so here in the regression as of such, considering the whole picture, there was not a very proper temperature dependence seen, but it was there, but it was not significant. So temperature will have an effect because nitrous oxide is a very temperature dependent process. So, and then for the second part, actual flux calculation, real time, if you're asking real time calculation, is it real time calculation or estimation?
Oh yeah, I mean like real time calculation based on your studies.
Yeah. So, due to limited funds and, I'll be very honest here, due to technological, we do not have the technology to go for the continuous real-time measurement of the fluxes. So we had to resort to only the micrometeorological method. So I confess that this flux estimation value may have a lot of uncertainties, but definitely with more and more research in these areas, then the uncertainty can be minimized.
All right, thank you very much, Avanti.
Thank you so much.
So I think if there's no further question, I would like to thank you, Avanti, very, very much. And I would like to go ahead for our next speaker, who is Isa Elegbede. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this correctly, from Nigeria. He did his bachelor thesis in fisheries and followed up with a master's in marine sciences in Nigeria, where he's from. And then also additionally did an environmental science study period in Germany here at the BTU Cottbus, where he also did his PhD affiliated on marine sciences. And so now I lost it. And he will talk about data inclusivity as a prerequisite to achieve sustainability with respect to ocean and coastal resources. And as a researcher from Africa, he's very, very engaged in different institutions, as there are the IUCN or the GeoBlue Planet Marine Fisheries Workshop. And we're very happy to have you here, and we're very much looking forward to your presentation. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much, Karin. It's a pleasure to be here today to discuss together on topics around ocean and coastal data inclusivity, looking at the sustainable development consideration for Africa. Yeah, and as well, thanks to my colleague Avanti for giving that wonderful presentation. However, some of this data we collect from our blue space, for example, the ones shared by Dr. Avanti, needs to be applied in such a way that it will be useful to the common person benefiting from the aquatic space. And that is one of the consideration for this topic. Now, so basically we'll try to explain what we understand by blue data, which are the information we derive from both the living and the non-living dimensions of aquatic systems. And we have realized that there's need for marine and coastal data inclusivity, especially involving all stakeholders through exploring human rights, ensuring social equity and equality, and ensuring that communities that are directly or indirectly benefiting from this ecosystem are benefited, and as well they can be able to use the minimum data to enhance their livelihood, and likewise the indigenous or traditional communities. So based on this, to understand the value chain of data in making this impact is critical in Africa, especially in the Atlantic space where I work, and where we can drive towards sustainable development. And that is why we need to understand why Africa as a continent, despite the vast resources that we have, we still have issues surrounding poverty, hunger, and even mismanagement of these resources. And this could not be far-fetched from not managing our resources very well, and some of the unsustainable practices that we still engaged in. However, we need to agree that we have data deficits and control issues, that is stewardship. And I would like to talk about the data inclusivity and people that are at risk of exclusions, which include low-income households, coastal communities, people with some challenges, then old age groups, then some SMEs that are benefiting or doing their business around the blue space, and even some people that are not fortunate to go to school. So based on this, it is important to let us know the data value chain that exists and how we should transform in this space. As you can see, data, for example, from what to apply from what Mrs. Dr. Avanti said, after creating the data, there's need to look at it in the form of combination and transformation and analyzing. And after the analysis, how does this data how will data be available and to be able to make impact in decisions, and as well to be able to be used by the business, the market owners, and even the communities around the blue economy. And that is why we are talking issues on coastal data sharing. And we have seen that this data and information sharing are not usually visible to these large stakeholders that we have mentioned. And another issue is that the issue surrounding different languages, and people that are collecting this data do not translate those languages to the desired language that these people, our users, would need. And another thing is usability. How would they even use this data? Assuming they have this data, how would they use this data to be able to benefit their catches, for example, the fishers, probably other people doing their businesses around the coastal environment. And that is why it is important to talk about sharing of this data. And this data needs to be shared in a way that it will be open and not be secure, that people will not have access to. Then there's need to have substantive and innovative standards that would allow these data, the data holders, to define them so that the public will be able to get the data. And our institutional support, that is governments, should be able to lead the way to declassify this data and to be able to see how this data can benefit our people, and the need to support with incentives, because some of these incentives will support the data providers and as well the public users. Then apart from this, transparency is important, especially looking at the seafood chain. And in Africa, we are here to have like a uniform or robust system for tracing our food, which is a big concern across board. And that is why it is important to talk about the coastal data inclusion framework that we can also apply in this context. So we have, there are so many, but I'll pick the key important ones: the trust, the fear, and the care. That is, these three are the ones that we need to look for Africa to have this data to be collected adequately and transformed and used by our users. And we'll talk about the care framework. So the care talks about collective benefits, the authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. So we're talking about the benefit, that is, this data should not benefit only decision makers. However, people in the bottom, the indigenous people, they should be carried along in practicing and using this data. And as well, stewardship, that is controlling this data. These people as well should have control and access based on their interests. Then likewise, there should be topics around minimizing harms, and as well to maximize benefit for these traditional and local communities through collecting, integration, and using this data. And as well, responsibility to be able to have these people working with their data and to be able to have the passion to share how their data are being used, and to have self determination with collective benefit. Now, besides, we talk about FAIR principles, and the FAIR principles talks about finding the description of the data, the metadata, which should be easy for all to be able to locate the data. Then the interoperability of the data, which needs to work with how the system flows, including analyzing and processing this data, and how is this data accessible to the users, and how they can be able to get them and use them for their uses. Then reusing the data to optimize and to have comprehensive information and analysis. And that leads us to the African Data Transformation Strategy, which talks about having an inclusive data society and economy for Africa, so that our citizens can be, the life of our citizens can be improved. And this could be done through 3 key aspects, that is connecting, catalyzing, and supporting. And connecting all stakeholders with innovators as well, and as well exploring citizen participation in this data through engaging them with various innovative technologies, and as well exploring the implementation of these policies across the continent. And that is why we would like to talk about some of the projects we do in the global South on citizen science with SDG principles around coastal communities in Badagry. We had a discussion with the coastal community on how they could explore the SDG goals and how they can use those goals, linking them together with SDG 14 to solve some of their problems. And some of the tools that we explored in the context of citizen science include steps like planning, identifying the need or the problems that exist, and how SDG can be explored to solve them, linking them to SDG 14, and as well looking at the right approach in stage 2 that can be used, and also designing the project, then building the community and taking the data and as well managing and evaluating the activity and the project. So basically, this should have impact and tangible outcome to decision makers, and as well there should be inflow and feedback from participants. And that is why I would like to as well x-ray and show like a simple way whereby the citizens, in terms of inclusivity of data, can be used to generate information. And you can see after citizens have collected this data and probably through their project team, they link together and see how they can code this data, exploring all various tools, then prepare the data for sensitivity, and as well organize those data based on the standards and control. And these are some of the online open license platform which this data can be published, and as well can be accessible to everybody, including all the excluded people in the chain. And this is also a citizen science quality assurance process that can be explored, that include collecting the data, and which there will be like a train for participants vis-a-vis the research you are doing, either physical, chemical, biological, or human dimension research. We can explore these templates according to DLEC 2022, that talks about citizens participating in the training them on how to collect the data and analyzing the data, excluding some unreliable information, then filtering and correcting this data, then as well treating them, and afterwards doing some integrations and giving a simple visualization to be able to understand them based on their knowledge. And that is why there are outcomes that talks about number one, which indicate that there are people that are excluded, and that is linked back to the decade of Africa that talks about no one should be left behind, through having active participation in collecting the data and sharing the data for citizens. And as well, there's need to combine both bottom-up and top-bottom approaches and to be able to collect them. And likewise, exploring the decade of action requirement that shows the cruciality for growth while we use our data adequately. And so for the decade of action for Africa, I tried to bring out some points that there is need to incentivize the use of using technologies such as artificial intelligence, the autonomous vehicles, and there are low costs for the people to be able to collect some data. And we know from research that Africa basically is still lagging behind in terms of collecting some oceanic data. And as well, to be able to have transparency and having open access of our blue data resources. Then exploring between the scientific and the traditional observation of data, while these indigenous communities would be given the chance to be actively involved in decision making, and likewise to support scientists and all stakeholders. And we should not forget the reasons why we should fill the gaps in digitizing our data to put them in attractive and to be communicated to all and sundry that will be useful for people in the continent. And that is why we talk about promoting this thing through engaging those marginalized people that I've talked about in the previous slide, then increasing their awareness and the need to collect data, possibly through citizen science or through other means, and as well making an inquiry about equity and data equality, and having everybody having data, because we're talking about gender equality, but we've forgotten to talk about data equality and data equity, whereby everybody will have access to this data and they'll be able to maximize them and use them for their benefit, and as well the aspect of having safe data also. And that will link to why is need for partnership across between the global north and global south. And everybody talks about SDG 14 and other SDGs and how they link together, but we forget to talk about SDG 17 and how the power in SDG 14 in solving some of our problems in the global south, for example, in Africa. And there's need to look at how to implement the SDG through a partnership, and as well partnering between the low-income countries and having domestic partnership. Then also low-income countries are least able to advance in this SDG, and we know that we are in the decade of action, and mostly probably because of inadequate capacities, which it is crucial that there's need for capacity building support for people. And possible solutions through partnership between the global north and global south. Number one, talking about the need to address the challenges posed by existing global inequalities in design and implementing partnership, then to require the perception of capacity building, the capacity need between partners, especially from the low-income countries, because this is something that requires great consideration, and as well to be able to respond to the needs of low-income countries rather than pursue a northern agenda, because we have seen a lot of agendas programs being sent to the global south. However, those things do not really talk about the need of these people in the low-income countries. However, they are mostly to portray the northern agenda, which most likely is one of the reasons why the global south is still, some of the global south is still in the underdeveloped stage. And it is important to also talk about investing in establishing the multi-country partnership. And I was just came from COP27, and some of the things that were discussed is robust finance, long-term finance in solving our climate problems. And that is why there's need to see long-term financial investment in encouraging and to support this North-South partnership. Then likewise, to see how we can forge in with mutual, non-discriminatory and equity way, so that we can achieve the 2030 agenda. Then as well, let's look at minding the gaps between these two situations so we can adequately implement this partnership for sustainable development. I'm rounding up gradually, and I will not stop until I remind us the decade of action that talks about mobilizing everyone and everywhere, and as well as an ambition and something as a matter of urgency. And we should look at low-cost technologies, innovations that will be able to solve our problems. And lastly, we should all know that the benefit of sharing data in the inclusive form of concept for the African continent is important. Then we need to connect all individuals. And lastly, there's need to exchange knowledge. And as I always say, we all have things to learn from one another, the global and the global south. We need to exchange knowledge, and so we need to adapt lessons from the technological advancement from the global north, so that we can all achieve the SDG goal by 2030, looking at the lapses and mistakes from the MDGs, which has prompted structuring the SDG together. So on this note, I thank everyone for listening, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much for this great overview on a problem that is for sure not a problem only in Africa, but here, of course, deserves special attention. Thanks a lot, ASLO. So, are there questions from the audience? There you go. I see some hands up. Maybe I'm not as quick. Maybe you just go ahead. There we are. Sorry. Maybe you just go ahead. I just can't see who has his hand up.
I have my hand up. It's Roxanne.
Hi, Roxanne.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
No problem. I'm on my phone, so I don't even know if I put my hand up correctly. But anyhow, I wanted to thank you for that really, really great perspective. And I truly believe that there is a real need to create more open forums and open systems to share information and data, and particularly in areas that have perhaps not had as much information kind of collated and gathered over time. I guess where my question is going is from a marine sustainability point of view, what do you think is the most urgent information to gather for Africa right now? And, how would you go about enacting that? In that, I don't disagree that there's lots of different stakeholders involved and different, but I guess it was just more, what would be a concrete example that would be, if you could implement it immediately, you would do?
Yes, thank you so much, Rox. Yes, as for Africa, Africa is a multi-country continent. And before we can say that what is the urgent need, there's need to have to do, like I mentioned, to do a need assessment of what people need. Our concern is majorly going to the beneficiaries of the blue space of the aquatic or blue economy, and we realize they are being neglected. So it would be fine to explore their needs before bringing any support or any aid. So we are open to work on this as a project to see how we can look at the needs of beneficiaries of the aquatic space, and from there we can adequately advance on solving some of these problems. For example, the fishing communities. For example, the small-scale fishers are facing some problems, which could be linked to scientific, and as well could be linked to support. Then likewise, our scientific community as well are battling with issues of poor infrastructures to be able to collect data around the aquatic space. I'm also part of the DOSI network, Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative Network, and as well Challenger 150. we realized, we did a study recently, and we realized there is gap in along the Atlantic coast of Africa on some data on our aquatic resources. And that is why, based on my present slide on board that talks about the matter of urgency, the need to work together and to share knowledge. And as well, I've always said this because during one of my research fellowship in Canada, we worked with the indigenous community in Mi'kmaq community in Halifax, and we realized the indigenous community have their own historic knowledge and traditional background. There is need to share knowledge and to share lessons so that we can be at par towards solving achieving the SDG 2030 agenda.
Yeah, thanks so much for that answer. And I agree, and I apologize for, in a way you presented sort of Africa very generally. So, I appreciate that there's an immense amount of diversity. And of course, the problems, depending on where you are, or let's say the need to address something is going to be highly variable. And I think that's really important to assess initially. I think another thing that's kind of interesting to consider in sort of looking at these needs assessments, so it's which sort of regions or communities or that you can connect amongst each other, right? Because the challenges of some areas, others might have already found solutions. And sometimes I think there's a lack of a mechanism for that, I think. And I think that's really, really, really important, not just synthesizing the information and making it openly accessible, but also networking across the different stakeholder groups to understand how different challenges might have been overcome or avoided, eh?
Yeah. And especially recently, we are talking about topics around a digital twin, the digital twin and data, and we realize this is also a way to support people in the data needs and the data usability value chain. So these are areas that we can work on, and we are always available to work together and see how we can assist this. We can assist with tackling this problem and filling the gaps.
Awesome. I think Mina, you have another question.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Isa, thank you for this very insightful talk. It's really extremely important topic to talk about. I assume that to achieve the 2030 agenda, there will be a lot on the shoulders of early career scientists and networks, but also what I find as one way to collect as many data as possible and to achieve the agenda is to use to do it through citizen science projects, as you mentioned. I'm wondering, you also said that there is a discussion how to publish and where to publish. I'm wondering if there is some budget allocated also there to do training of citizen science volunteers across Africa to train them to collect data that will be valid and comparable. So to increase the value of the collected data and effort.
Okay, sorry, you mean there is funding available, right?
If there is a fund available, or if you already have planned.
Yeah, there are inadequate funds. However, we are discussing with one of my colleagues in South Africa to build an African robust network for citizen scientists, where it will not be limited to only scientists alone. We need to bring everybody on board, like I've said, both the coastal communities, users, down to probably even the consumers, to get their perception of the use of these blue resources in the blue economy. So we are working on that, and require synergy on how we can advance all these things forward. So that's the essence of some of these discussions, some of these fora that we have, to see how we can work together and to have network and partnership advancing on this topic.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
There is one more question from Anthony. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And thanks, Isa, for the excellent presentation. I always try not to miss the opportunity to listen to Isa's presentations because they're always very insightful. But I have one question and one comment. Yeah, the question is this, and it's closely linked to the very first question you were asked, Isa. You said that we need to carry out a need assessment before we go about implementing the data collection and also the template which you proposed here. But aren't there some areas which we already know, for example, in Africa, where we know that there's a complete lack of data? For example, we do not really even know what is the nature of our stocks, fish stocks. We do not know what is the actual blue capital which we have in Africa. And we barely even know what our mangrove area in our estuaries are. So don't you think that we should already start there by trying to gather data on these specific areas, which are very important in order to help us either to protect our resources, conserve, or even to manage our resources? Don't you think we should start there without necessarily having to go to ask people what are their needs? And that's the first one. And the second one is this. Do you have, this is more like a comment, because what you propose here is quite important. And so far, is there any way you're already bringing this to, let's say, policymakers or other institutions that would be willing to use this kind of framework in order to start collecting data on vital ecosystems in Africa? Thank you.
Yes, Tony. Yeah, I'm always glad when I see Tony beside me in presentations. Thank you, Tony, for the questions. So, firstly, yes, the need assessment is to check updated needs of the people. However, we know that there are gaps in so many areas in the continent and in some countries. So it will be fine if you have existing information on those places. We should quickly, as a matter of urgency, as shown in my slide, to quickly get support and initiate doing something around those areas. However, some areas where, because needs are usually continuous, and the need to also update what you want is also a factor. And that is why those areas that we have existing gap, let's try to fill them, that we know. However, the areas that we need probably to do some assessment, which we should explore. Yes, we published a paper in 2020, during that, before COVID, on blue economy for Africa, along with my colleague Kafor. And we talked about all these things there on how to bring about top-bottom and bottom-top approach to stakeholders, especially solving this problem in Africa. So based on this, for this framework, citizen science is not only limited to the community and the scientists. No, even the decision makers, the government should be part of the team, and it should be a way of having a transparent and clean value chain activity, so that we can have rich results. And you don't know, we have seen cases whereby citizen science data collected were even better than some data collected even in a core scientific area. We've seen research that have been done in Canada and some part of the world where citizen science collected data with all stakeholders are more richer and more quality when exploring the data assurance principles than usually me just going to the water body and collect my data and do my research, then I publish the data. Because some of these people have, like I said, they have their historic and human-centric attribute and values to some of these data that we do. For example, in some part of the world, in small-scale fisheries, they don't need to have navigators to go fishing. They have some ancestral knowledge that they know, and those things usually work for them. Probably it might not be 100%. They work for them on on normal cases. So in this case, we can, like I said, we can share knowledge between the scientific community and these local people, so that we can always have
I think the internet connection might be lost.
All right, thank you, Isa.
Sorry.
I think we lost you there in the last sentence, but I think I got it. Thank you. Yeah, so I think that leads us back to the second question, which was on the need to train people on how to collect data, right? Or like in terms of citizen science, how to collect and how to store and disseminate data.
Hello.
Yeah, Isa, I'm getting you.
Isa, are you still there?
Yes. I think the network is fluctuating. Sorry again. Tony, come again. Sorry.
Yes, sorry. I was saying that leads us now back to the second question, which was on the need to educate and train citizens on how to collect data, especially in Africa.
Maybe the internet connection is a bit sketchy here.
Yeah.
But maybe I can quickly jump in and follow up on.
Sorry,
Yeah, Isa, go ahead.
Right, to users, right? Yeah, you mean they need to send those data to users. Am I right?
Yeah, they need to train people on how to collect data, right? And because most people will not even know how to collect and how to store the data they've collected.
Yes,
in the community.
Yes, it's very important to train them and to allow them to have some level of exposure. For example, look at this slide that talks about giving them some training on sampling, and as well, depending on the kind of research that we want to do. Like citizen science has been applied to all kinds of research, both qualitative and quantitative researches. So, for example, you might be using some technologies, so there will be need to even train them on the use of all these technologies and give them some basic research knowledge. And as well, it is important in the context of inclusivity to always recognize and appreciate their contributions, so that in the future, their coming generations will also know that probably my great-grandfather or my grandfather was part of this study. So we have seen cases in Canada where I worked a lot on where indigenous communities are usually co-authors of researches that are done to them. And all these researches are co-designed with them from beginning, not to just simplifying, I'm Mr. A, I'm Dr. A, I'm coming to the community to collect data. No, don't only collect data, they should be part of the planning proposal stage, so that at the end of the day, the research can be richer than the normal one. Because there's a local saying in my community that talks about says two heads are better than one. So merging knowledge, merging values will always bring about good result, and as well following these protocols, so that at the end of the day, science would be advancing, not the usual do research, publish, and your research is only on Scopus or probably only on ISI, and how the local people can always benefit, and how they can be instrumental in this journey of change across board. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Isa. And everyone else who has been contributing to the discussion also. And all these things that you've been talking about, they are so valid all over the world. And also here we're discussing a lot in Germany on how to be more inclusive in what we do, and this is something that I think science is still at the very beginning of understanding how important this all is. And it's a challenge for all of us, I think, but especially for you, Isa, since you are putting so much effort in that. I wish you all the best for your success in the future in that. And with that, I want to thank you guys for talking here, Avanti and Isa. And I wish you all a very good end of this year. And I hope to see you in 2023 in January. Next Amplifying Voices session will be probably on the 26th.